This is the Rising Tide Startups podcast, where we chat with startup founders from all over the globe to help you escape the cubicle and begin your own startup journey. Make sure you take notes. Every episode of Rising Tide Startups is sponsored by Podbrand Media. Let Podbrand create and host your company branded podcast. Learn more at podbrandmedia.com. This is Kevin Pruitt with another episode of Rising Tide Startups, and my special guest today is Ben Foster. Ben, thanks for joining us on Rising Tide.
Hey, thanks so much for having me. I really appreciate it.
He's already got me laughing before I hit the big red record button, so I am looking forward to this interview. And Ben, if you and I met at a networking event, like, how would you introduce yourself to me?
Yeah, it's a great question. I would introduce myself as saying I've been a product guy through and through in my career. And what I love to do now is to help entrepreneurs, CEOs, founders of companies, and sometimes their product leaders that they're working with to really understand what their customer value proposition is and how they can best leverage that to create a very successful business. That's what I do. That's what I'm all about.
So where are you sitting right now?
I am sitting in my office, which is based in Arlington, Virginia, right outside of DC.
Arlington. Well, see, I'm about an hour and a half south of you right now, so I'm in the Confederate capital of Richmond, Virginia, as we speak.
Right.
So,
all right, not too far apart.
Not too far. So it is really good to have you on the show. But I told you that you're going to say things that are going to cause me to ask follow-up questions. But you touched on the idea of product management. That's a fairly recent term that I think that in the business vernacular. What do you think has been kind of the genesis of that? And as you look back, I mean, when do you think that even came into vogue?
I think that product management in many ways has sort of existed, spanning across a bunch of different functions previously. And I think it was really formalized into a specific role during that dot-com boom that happened in Silicon Valley. I'm talking about late 1990s. That's really when it kind of got established. And I was fortunate enough to have graduated from UC Berkeley, and I was in the Bay Area really at the right time in the right place. I graduated in 1997, and I felt like I was part of the Renaissance. It was like there's so much new stuff going on and new and it was just so exciting. Then there was the other end of it on the dot-com, right. Fail and bust as well. But it was really this time when companies were trying to figure out a new model because they were going to work in such a different way. You had an ability to make billions of dollars in valuation in a course of a couple of years. And historically, the kinds of companies that would do that were these big manufacturing companies. It would take them decades to make those kinds of, strides. And here, you had these Silicon Valley companies with these really weird names and, things like that were popping up out of nowhere. And it required, I think, to make that happen, the formation of this role of product management, because the CEO couldn't just be the visionary for this idea. And it wasn't just a matter of executing really well when it came to production. It was a matter of conceiving of what this new thing could be in this brand new world where all this new technology existed. And so what you really have with product management is the blending of customer needs, business needs, and then the technology that supports that underneath as well.
So did Berkeley have a product management degree? I'm being facetious here. So what was your entry point into that discipline? Yeah,
you're right to be facetious, because even at this time, as sort of popular as product management has become as such an important and crucial role at any kind of like tech startup, there's still no ability at any university that I'm aware of where you can major in product management. It's kind of amazing that everybody kind of gets into it. Everybody has their story for how they grew into it. I was, back in the day, I was at Berkeley and I studied statistics. And the ironic thing is, now we live in this era of, AI and everybody can totally understand the value of a statistics degree. And it's incredibly valuable for what it's worth to be able to think about things that way. But at the time, nobody even knew what I was going to do with something like that. Was I going to do actuarial science and work, with an insurance brokerage or something like that? Or you could use it for Wall Street investment type things. But at that same time was this revolution of the internet and, the amount of data that these companies had available about how their customers were using product and the way that you could use that data to draw insights and then use that to then make a better product for them.
Mm-hmm.
That was sort of this novel kind of revolution. I think it really took place at the time. And so right time, right place. I'd love to say that I was a genius and started this all coming, but that would not be true.
Well, you haven't had the opportunity to kind of walk through your serpentine journey, to these places, but there seems to be a story that I think I heard on another interview you had done about, you talked about, what goes up must come down. I mean, the boom and on the bust side of that. So talk about how you ended up at a well-known company in Silicon Valley, on the backside of that, and the fortune of being able to kind of land on your feet when so many others were struggling. So walk us through that journey.
Yeah, sure. So let's rewind the clock back to that time. It's 1999, 2000. I was working at a company called Webvan that was heralded at the time as being this, really inspired concept of grocery delivery to your house. And this was back before Amazon was even really a big deal, even distributing books. And so in a lot of ways, it was kind of too far ahead of its time. I think people weren't really ready to not go to the grocery store and, feel the peach before they put it in their cart and things like that. But there were a number of ways in which the company was grossly mismanaged, and that a lot of money was spent on things that could have been much cheaper, where they could have realized for a much lower cost and in a smaller amount of time that this just wasn't going to work, or they needed to iterate to get to the right answer. And that just wasn't a belief at the time. The company even legitimately said, we are going to skip the startup stage and go directly to being a big company. And that was one of the worst, it's like a joke in retrospect. And this is actually taught as a case study in business school about how not to do a business, And so that company imploded. I joined when it was $1 billion valuation and we had $300 million in the bank. And less than 12 months later, we were bankrupt and zero valuation. It's just an amazing, journey.
Is that the worst burn rate in the history of the world?
I think the two classics from that era were Webvan and Pets.com. They're kind of like classics, back from the day. But anyway, there was one company that was doing remarkably well at that time. That was eBay. And, especially at the time that people were starting to lose some of their jobs and things like that, but people were coming more online at the same time. You had all these people who were collectors of things and they wanted to buy things online and they wanted to find these obscure items that they couldn't really get from a typical store. And eBay had this explosive growth during that period. And so I joined eBay. I was very fortunate to kind of get in at the right time. It was an amazing crew of people that were there at that time. And I really learned product management from one of the people who's well known today as being one of the great kind of like founders of product management, whose name is Marty Kagan. And I was on his team when he was hiring, and I was part of this initial group of 12 product managers. And 4 years later, when I left eBay, there were 120 product managers. So that's the kind of explosive growth that company felt during that window. But I feel like I really learned the fundamentals of what good product management looked like. But what was next in my journey, and what was really exciting for me to do next, was to not work at a big company, but to take that to startup land.
So walk us through that. So that's a beautiful segue. You teed it up for yourself there. So what is the next logical step when you step out of a large corporation into maybe the unknown abyss of startup land?
I think when it comes to being successful with a startup, whether you're an entrepreneur or you're in some sort of other role, there's so much unknown. It's like you're trying to navigate in this fog.
That's part of the fun of it, though, right?
It is part of the fun of it, but it's also part of the danger of it. You're right. You don't know if you're about to trip on something and fall on a rake. And so the issue is it's really difficult to navigate. You're constantly making, constantly having to flex on things that you thought you had right. Hey, we're going to come up with this pricing model. Actually, it turns out nobody wants to buy my product that way. Who knew? Okay, I guess we should switch to this, right? So there's this really tricky thing you have to do where you have to sometimes follow the playbook for success. And sometimes because you're doing something that's new and you're trying to create a product that hasn't even existed before, you're also having to ignore the playbook and say, actually, I'm going to do this differently. I'm going to do this very intentionally differently, right? And I kind of liken being successful as a startup entrepreneur to the way that a great artist is. Picasso didn't draw people with their eyeballs in weird places and
Mm-hmm.
weird faces and things like that because he didn't know how to draw people properly, right?
Right.
It's because he knew how to draw people properly. He knew the playbook. He knew the way that
Mm-hmm.
it was supposed to be done right, that he could then go beyond that to
Mm-hmm.
then say, and I'm gonna create a new rule set. I'm gonna break the rules, and I'm gonna kind of like establish it over here as well. A great basketball player, doesn't do these crazy moves, dribbling the ball, doing some reverse dunk or something like that because they don't know how to dribble the way you learn in high school. It's
Right.
because they have those fundamentals down so well that they're capable of going, well beyond that. And I think
Mm-hmm.
I found it to be invaluable for my own career. I had the expertise that came from learning the playbook, at a larger company where the role had been established. And then to take that show on the road to these startups and say, okay, I know what's supposed to kind of happen here,
Mm-hmm.
but I also see exactly why that wouldn't be appropriate in this particular case. And
Yeah.
here's how we're going to do it differently in this company. And here's why we're going to do it differently in this company. But at least you know that you're doing it differently intentionally, as opposed to I'm just completely making this stuff up as I go. So big difference between the two. And that's a lot of times why I encourage people who are in these kinds of roles to work with someone who has that kind of experience. If you're doing
Mm-hmm.
this for the first time, maybe you've got the right understanding of the market and the customer that you're going after and the problem you're trying to solve. But do you also have the ability to tap into the experience
Mm-hmm.
of somebody who's maybe worked in a different kind of space, but does have that kind of rule book? And by working together and having this collision of ideas, you can come up with both what is the sort of standard way of doing something that might be applicable at your company, but also to realize how you can go beyond that to be the most successful you can be as an entrepreneur.
I've been doing this for 5.5 years and heading into the 6th year. And I think this is one of those rare times where the guest says something that is so crystal clear to me that I have like a mid-interview epiphany. So I'm a sports nut. I love sports.
Yeah, I gotta know what the epiphany is.
So when you were talking about, following the playbook and then you're thinking until it doesn't, it doesn't fit and whatever, then you kind of abandon that. I was likened to, so football. I love pro football. So pro football has some fundamental things that every coach could agree on, that says, you blocking, tackling, how to catch a football, those types of things that's kind of the basic manual, the basic playbook or whatever. But then you have these young guns that come in, like the coach at the Rams and the coach of the Packers and the coach of the 49ers, who take that basic playbook and they're not abandoning it, they're adding to it. They are building like another element on the side of that. And it's not just because it's cool, it's because the defense has shifted and they're having to find a new way to address the problem. And it is so I've never drawn that parallel before. You hear it. That's what, use the playbook and in your business playbook or whatever. But the way you described that, it just painted such a vivid picture in my mind. You're not going to have to write a book about this, maybe.
About Sounds good. We'll jump on that right afterwards.
But I did hear it in another interview you talked about, you don't write a book to make money. So
no, you do not.
That is not what you're getting into it for. So
yeah.
But it was, I don't want to take all the time just, chasing this rabbit, but it was
I love it.
Interesting how, as you were talking, just this image that came to mind about, these younger coaches, they don't abandon it, they adapt it. And because it's very, I think it's very parallel to product management that says, when you're looking at product market fit, when you're looking at how to market a product, how, what are the guidelines that are the milestones that have to be built to launch something. I mean, it is so clear that there is a basic roadmap, but you've got to adapt it. The defense is going to throw you some curves. The market's going to shift. You've got to be able to be responsive to changes, to catalysts that are introduced to the new catalysts that are introduced to the market. So anyway, I just wanted to, that's my way of saying thank you.
That's great.
For that new epiphany.
Awesome. That's great. it is really interesting, this dichotomy that you have of, on the one hand, you want to do the things that are tried and true, that are known to work, that that people have been figuring out for hundreds of years, and piggyback on top of that. But on the other hand, you have this need to be creative and novel in some way. Now, I think in the world of, sometimes let's take like brick and mortar stores.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not sure that's necessarily true. Sometimes you can do something that's different and novel, but a lot of times there's space for multiple companies to be successful because they have their different territories, they have their different streets
Mm-hmm.
that they're on. One is looking for foot traffic, and the other one's looking. So you've got this sort of ability for there to be a variety of different winners in the space. And I think one of the things that's really forced this need to be creative and think about what's going to be really differentiated versus everything else that's out there is in the world of tech and the world of internet-based software and things like that. You're all competing with one another.
Right.
I don't care where that company's based. They could be based halfway across the globe, and
they don't care where you're based.
Just
That's right.
Exactly, right. And so you've had this like shrinking of the world where everybody has access to everything. And what that means is you're not going to have 10,000 different winners and 10,000 different losers. You're going to have 19,998 losers and 2 winners. And that's what it's going to look like, right? I mean, how many, attempts at different technologies are going to be, in terms of Uber and Lyft? How many different attempts will there be in terms of DoorDash and the other, food delivery companies, et cetera, right? But eventually you get to a place where either there's this kind of race to the bottom that happens where their margins get so thin because they're competing against each other that it's really difficult, or you find where there's just one clear winner, the way that Amazon really took over when it came to retail, et cetera. So because they all have to compete with one another, it forces you to say, okay, how is my product, how's my offering going to be differentiated versus everybody else? And it's not just a matter of making sure that it's better because it has the better features. I mean, there's tons of examples out there of the quote unquote better product that should have won, but didn't win anyway. And it's because the go-to-market plan, the product positioning, et cetera, was better for some other product that was out there, even if it was lesser in many ways, because it had the right way of finding that fit with the target market and was more directly attached to the customer problem as the customers themselves would have articulated it.
And as you mentioned earlier, I mean, maybe timing was just bad. I mean, it could have been a great product and you have the market, but it's just like that they weren't ready. They were not educated. They weren't, it wasn't that like eBay introduced 10 years earlier may not have had the same success that it did, post.com bust. But what a great first part of our interview here. We just talked about just kind of the generic science, around product management and about how it impacts business as a whole on the macro sense. But right after our break, our sponsor break here, I want you to kind of drill down a little bit more on the micro side of things and say, how does this affect those that are, in the small business space or that are trying to launch something or so? But right after a word from our sponsors.
And now here's a quick word from one of our new sponsors on Rising Tide Startups.
Have you been wanting to start a podcast but not sure where to start? Well, now you can start a podcast in less than 24 hours. I'm David Ezel, and I'll walk you through all of the things that you need to get started today. Things like how to choose the right microphone, how to edit your audio, and how to find guests and build a pipeline of future guests. This course does a great job of keeping things high level while also diving into the things that keep most people from starting. Even better, if you use the code RISING at checkout, you'll get 20% off your purchase. But that's only if you use the code RISING at checkout. What are you waiting for? Start your podcast today.
We are back. Thanks again, Ben, for chatting with us today on Rising Tide Startups. And we said after the break, we were going to drill down a little bit more on the micro side of things. So let's I just want to kind of just leave the space open for you. If you're speaking to our audience that are that are trying to create something, that have a small business, that have an online business, especially, or wanting to start one, kind of walk us through the things that you've learned that you think are applicable to them.
Yeah, we talked in the first half here about the theory, I think, of what product is about and how to think about these things as an entrepreneur and some of the history. Let me jump now into some pragmatic, specific recommendations that I would advise for any kind of early stage founder, whether that's a tech-based company or not, to be totally honest. I think that it's really important that you separate those things for your own sake, as well as for anybody else that you're working with, whether that's a co-founder or employees that you have on your team. You separate what are those things that you're holding fast, that you're holding true to no matter what, and what are those things that you're completely willing to change if you need to in order to make those other things work. So I'll give you a couple examples, right? Your product vision should include things like what's your target market, who's your target customer, what's the problem that you're trying to solve for them, how would they describe that problem, what are the key elements of your solution that you're going to sort of have that's going to be differentiated within the space, that's going to make it better than the other products that are out there, right? Those things should probably be really, really clear. And I don't think that you really want to budge on those unless you're actively making a complete pivot about what your company is about. So those are things that are part of the vision that should be really stable. Now, what's your pricing strategy around that? What's the best design to get somebody to sign up to subscribe to your product? What's the best name of the button? What's the right kind of branding for this? What's the right marketing message? All of those are sort of like the means for how you achieve what you just sort of like talked about, right? And the more you can be crystal clear about what the distinguishing characteristics of those things are, or which things fall into which categories, then the more the team that you're working with, or even you yourself, will, as an entrepreneur, understand these are the things that I need to find a way to make happen. And these are the levers that I have. These are the changes that I can make. These are the dials and the knobs that are sort of like available for me to fine tune as I try to get to that magic place of product market fit, where our customers are clearly getting so much value from our product that I'm not worried anymore about whether I can extract the business value and the revenue and things like that I'm looking for, because they find it to be so valuable that they're clearly willing to pay. And I'm getting more and more customers finding me because they're finding it to be exactly the right kind of thing that suits their needs. So, that separation is really important. And I think a lot of people kind of skip over that step. It's like, oh, kind of just take it for granted. But I can't tell you the number of times that I've gone into a first advisory session with a CEO, a founder of a 12-person company, something like that. And I asked them to reveal their vision and their strategy to me, and they go to the whiteboard and they're really excited about it. They describe the whole thing to me. And then I say, this is fantastic. I love it. It's great. And then I go talk to somebody else on the team. I ask them the same question. And either I get a blank stare, they don't know, or they tell me something that's in their head, but is not the same thing that the CEO is saying. And it's just so incredibly painful when there's a disconnect about those things, because then what's going to happen is somebody else has a different interpretation, right?
Yep.
They change something that was supposed to be stable, right? They're like, actually, we're going to go after this target market instead of that one. And the marketing team decides that that's what they want to do. Well, in the meanwhile, the engineers are working on building something for the existing target market. While, in the meantime, sales is making promises that neither party is planning on keeping. And that's how these companies kind of find themselves really floundering at a later stage, because they didn't get that part right in those initial stages.
I think it might scare you that how often that happens at large companies.
Absolutely.
Probably I can by personal experience, I can say that has certainly been the case from time to time. But when you're talking about like non-negotiables, are you talking about is it culture? Is it product features? Is it strategic direction and vision? Or is it all the above?
Well, I think I would classify the vision and the strategy as being non-negotiables, at least at the moment, right? So maybe there's even three categories. I would say it's really important that you have your vision clearly articulated and that you clarify to the rest of the company. This is why it's a vision, right? This is where we're headed,
right?
Straight up. We're not changing where we're headed. That's where we're going. And one way or another, we're going to find a way of getting there, okay? That's kind of what defines a vision in a lot of ways. The strategy is kind of somewhere in the middle, right? Where it's something that I want to be clear and I want everybody to be aligned against. I want to make sure that everyone's working towards the same thing. If we're going to expand our target market to include those folks over there, then I want marketing to act with that. I want product to act with that. I want sales to act with that. I want customer support to act in that way. You name it. I want everybody to be kind of aligned against this. But the strategy is still in service of the vision. And if you realize at some point that the strategy is no longer the right strategy because maybe some huge competitor comes along or Google decides to launch, something that replicates your product, well, maybe that's a thing you shouldn't be ignoring. And that might have an effect on your strategy. Sometimes it'll be a positive effect. Sometimes it'll be a negative. I mean, we all just went through COVID in 2020, right?
Yep.
That's a
Yep.
major change that
You better
everybody
shift your
had to kind of go
strategy.
at the
That's
same
right.
moment and look at their strategy, right? And
Yep.
the companies that made those shifts, like Toast, they did remarkably well.
Mhm.
They could have been, they lost 90% of their revenue in a single month.
No pun intended. They could have been toast.
They could have been toast. Exactly. You got it. But they found a way to pivot. They changed their strategy. They didn't change their vision. They
Mhm.
still wanted to be the right tool set for restaurants to be successful, right?
Mhm.
But what that meant and the features that were embedded in that were going to be something that was going to be very different. So they had to make those pivots strategically, but not necessarily in terms of their vision. And then I think you have those things that are completely negotiable, where it isn't a matter of, hey, I want everybody to be aligned. Here's what we're doing.
Mhm.
I want you to be experimental. I don't want you to just do the thing because this is the way we've been doing it. I want you to try completely different options. I want you to launch this feature, that feature. I want you to change the marketing message and see which one happens to get the better click-through rates. You name it.
Mhm.
I'm not tied to any of those things. Whatever proves to work, that's what we're going with. So those are maybe the three buckets. Vision is that part that you're just like absolutely stable on, unless you're making a hard pivot for the company, almost like killing your company and reestablishing it,
Mhm.
with the same people. The strategy is that part that you want everybody to be aligned on. Everybody's on the same page, and it's stable until you decide to actively change it, but it may be a thing that you need to change. And then everything else is intentionally unstable. It's intentionally something that you're going to be flexible on because you want to give the people on your team the space and the availability to kind of figure out how to best make things, improved from where they are today.
Mhm. I'm curious, just you personally. So are you a build it and they will come guy? Are you a I got to find a group of people standing there wanting hamburgers and drive a food truck into the crowd? So or is it somewhere in between?
For me, it's you could say it's in between, or you could say it's both at the same time. I think that there's so many examples of very successful products that if you just relied purely on asking people what they want at the moment, that you never would have built the product. I mean, nobody said they wanted a car when there were horses. Nobody said that they wanted a Pringles size can on their kitchen counter before the Amazon Alexa Echo came out, right? There's so many examples of these things that have worked out really well because they were creative in some way that was going beyond what customer expectations or desires would have been, right? Even AI tools. I mean, I never, if somebody had interviewed me about using Google to answer my questions, I would have said, I would improve the search in this one particular way, et cetera. Then ChatGPT comes along and it's this completely different interface that is, not pointing me to web pages, but it's just directly answering my questions. I wouldn't have even thought to say that that's a thing that I wanted as a consumer.
Right.
So if they do all the
Great
kind
point.
of customer interviews, you're going to be limited by the level of creativity that your would-be customers have on their own. Now, it's still helpful to understand that you have to sell to a market, and that market is comprised of specific individuals, specific companies, specific people, et cetera. So you do need to kind of verify that what you're going to be building is going to work for them. But you shouldn't. I guess the way to put it is, don't outsource your creativity to your customers. Don't outsource your innovation to your customers. But do make sure that what you're actually working on, innovating on, is something that actually matters to them, right? Because there's a countless number of companies also that fail because they build some sort of amazing, cool technology that, like we said before, is either ahead of its time, or maybe is something that is just, it doesn't have a space in people's heads. It's not a category that they care about. And so it's really this challenge to kind of get the best of both of those worlds, where you're both relying on yourself to innovate, but you're also depending on your customers to validate.
Yeah, that's a great distinction between those two for sure. it's and when you were talking about that idea, they didn't know they wanted a car when they were, riding horses. And in there, didn't Henry Ford kind of say that? I mean, that's he said, you didn't know you wanted a car until I showed you what a car was, or
Yeah,
Steve Jobs says that you didn't know you wanted a computer in your home until we made one available for you, type thing. But and ask HP or I guess is there a way that you could kind of forecast or have that vision, to see it before it actually appeared? But it is such a it's a science. It is a little bit of luck. It's a little bit of product management is such a broad field, and it's not just for product managers. I mean, it really is a discipline even for business owners, to
absolutely
have to, especially even the solo brands. As you're building your solo brand, what does it look like to kind of manage the product or service you're trying to create? And it's not manage it like I'm making sure you show up on time. It's managing the process and the launch and the maintenance and the all the channels around that. So it's been such a great chat today, just to hear you kind of lay out, just from a macro and micro sense. But as we're wrapping up today, what have I not asked you about that you think would really be helpful to our audience to wrap us up with today? And then just tell people where the best place maybe to find out about you. And I think you've actually got a book out as well that I'd love for you to mention.
Yeah, absolutely. Happy to cover all those things. In terms of one big takeaway, I would say the biggest thing that you can do that I think a lot of people fail to do is to get in the mindset of your customer really, really well before you get in the mindset of your own business. So, for example, I'll talk to a lot of founders or entrepreneurs, CEOs, et cetera, and I say, tell me about what your vision is for your product and what it is that's going to really do. And they say, oh yeah, I've got a great vision for this. We're going to be at $10 million of annual recurring revenue by X date. I'm like, that's garbage. No, the problem with that is that or they'll say things like, we're going to revolutionize this space. Okay. And what I tell people is, here's the thing, you never revolutionize an industry directly. The way you revolutionize an industry is you solve a customer problem so well and in such a better way that you shift customers' expectations forever, such that all of your competitors are now left behind, right? Wow. And you've got, your name of your podcast is Rising Tide Startups. And I think that in a lot of ways, what you do is you rise. It's a rising tide. It's a rising set of expectations that you create for your customers because you elevate what their expectations should have always been, right? That's what real innovation is. And so it's just an example of making sure that you understand why your customers would want a solution like this, that you understand how they would measure success in using your product, right? So it's not just a matter of you're trying to make a buck and then sort of like secondarily, let's go figure out what kind of customer value I can create in order to go make that buck. You've got to invert that and you stay, what is the problem that's out there that's so pronounced, that's so meaningful that people will stop using their existing solution, switch over to mine, that they'll want to use my product, that they're going to talk about it with their friends at parties, et cetera. That's the kind of thing that I want to create. And if you nail that, if you do that really, really well, then your own business success will kind of like come along the way, at the same time. Like you don't have to worry about that part, because you'll be delivering so much value that you'll then have the opportunity to then charge for it, et cetera. And now suddenly you're going to be this profitable company. So there's way too much emphasis I think that happens. And that's partly because those metrics are a little bit more easily measured, those internal metrics. Right. What's my customer retention and how many customers did I acquire last month and things like that. Great. That's your own success that you're measuring. But sometimes what gets left behind is the customer. And I would encourage everybody to say, why would a customer choose to renew with me? What metrics would they look at to make that decision? Well, those are the metrics that I should be measuring, because if I'm not driving those things forward, then over time my products can get worse. And just like I can be working hard to try to like improve what my customers' expectations are going to be, keep in mind that all of your competitors are constantly innovating and making your customers' expectations higher and higher and higher. So if you're not continuing to innovate, then that means that your product is actually getting worse over time, as judged by the expectations of your customers. So you got to get in that mindset. I think that's kind of, something that's really important. I would encourage any founder, whether it's tech or anything, to always have that orientation and always start there. In terms of where to find more information about me or to connect with me, I love connecting with people on LinkedIn. I'm very easy to find. My handle is Ben Foster, so find me there. I'd love to connect with you and tell me that you listened to the podcast. It's great to know what kind of thing brought us together in the first place. So that's one. You can come to the website for the boutique advisory practice that I created, which is really all about sharing some of these best practices, templates, documents, very practical kind of like approaches to solve these problems. And that website is Prodify.group. That's Prodify.group. There's a lot of free resources and available information there. And if you want to connect with me or any of the other people who work in that boutique firm, we would love to get a chance to speak with you as well. Last thing you had asked me to mention was the book as well. So we wrote a book that kind of pulls a lot of these ideas together. And that book is called Build What Matters. So check that out. It's available on Amazon. You can either get that on Kindle or you can get that in either a hard copy or a paperback version as well.
Well, Ben, thanks for the props you gave us about the name of the podcast here, because you've certainly done your part to help all boats rise in a rising tide. Ben, thanks again for joining us. Have a great weekend.
Sounds great. You too.
I hope you heard some great takeaways from our guests today. Make sure you reach out to them, and thank you again for playing your part in helping all boats rise in a rising tide.